Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, The State of Disaster Recovery. Happy to have you all with us today. My name is Ellen Perlman, and I'm on the VP of Marketing at Zetta, and I'm pleased to be able to share the results of a recent survey we conducted late last year. I'm fortunate to be joined today by Jeff Whitehead, who is our CTO and co-founder of Zetta.
Good morning. So I've got 20 years of IT experience. I started at the IT help desk level, taking the computers out of the box and setting them up for people on their desk through data center implementations, business applications, and now I've been here at Zetta for about 9 years. We're trying to make disaster recovery and backups be easier and better than they have been so far.
Yeah, looking forward to Jeff being able to add some good color to some of the findings we uncovered. So just to give you an idea of how this is going to work today, I'm going to talk briefly about the methodology we use to get these results and dig into the findings. And then we've reserved some time at the end for questions and answers. Just as an FYI, we are recording the webinar today, and we're certainly happy to make the recording available to all of you. And if you are interested in sending us questions, you can easily do that via the chat button in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. We'll be collecting those questions throughout the webinar, and we will plan to answer them at the end. And with that, happy to get started to share with you what we've learned. Just to start off, we surveyed about 400 IT professionals online during a couple-week period in October. Our goal was to learn about their experiences with disaster recovery, what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, and what they are doing internally within their organizations to prepare for events both big and small. We are pleased to report that we had respondents coming to us from about 20 different industries, varying in size from organizations with 50 employees up to organizations with more than 1,000 employees.
Yeah, I think it's important to get a broad survey because people talk about IT as if it's one monolithic thing, but it's important to remember that IT is always exists within a context of a company that exists within a context of an industry. So IT for a manufacturer or for a retailer is going to be very different than IT for a software development shop, or a small company versus a large company have a different set of requirements.
So let's get into the findings. First off, we learned that almost 100% of the respondents to the survey have reported having a disaster recovery solution, but the types of disaster recovery solutions were varied. About 50% had solutions that include some form of cloud, either hybrid or cloud only, and just slightly less than that reported having physical off-site solutions, which I think was a bit surprising. I know Jeff has some things he'd like to say about this. Also, it's interesting to note that a third reported that they would be looking to make changes in their DR solution in the next 12 months.
I think what we really see here is that everyone knows they're driven by corporate governance or regulations or other reasons. You have to have a disaster recovery plan, but that can be anything from a single sheet of paper that somebody whipped up some ideas to a fully vetted, fully tested plan. And so I think the question is, you have a plan, but how good is it? How many different classes of disasters does it protect against?
One of the things that was interesting for us, and quite frankly heartening given the nature and focus of our business, is that those who are using cloud-based solutions reported a high degree of confidence in their solutions, close to about actually 90%, which was higher than those with on-premise only physical solutions. Although I think it's fair to say that both are relatively high in terms of confidence.
What's interesting to me about this is that folks with on-premise only are so confident, simply because there's a whole class of disasters that an on-site DR doesn't protect against. Namely, if the building burns down, if there's a flood, Also, human factors can affect a whole facility. You can have an electrician that screws up the power mains. It's unlikely for them to do that for 2 buildings at the same time. So I would tend to think that you need to have your data, in 2 places, and ability to actually serve your business out of those places to be protected against all classes of disaster.
We asked a series of questions in the survey to try and understand sort of perceptions that folks held towards DR solutions. And some of the results were actually quite surprising to us. One thing that stood out is, and probably the strongest message, was that there's still a perception that DR solutions are too expensive. My guess is, buyers of products often think everything is too expensive, but I think it stood out in terms of the other perceptions we asked about. And more than a third believe that they're hard to use, which was interesting. A few other data points worth considering. 42% reported that they believe that DR solutions that are in the marketplace today are too slow and have a feeling that they would not be able to deliver rapid recovery. And one other data point that I thought was interesting is we asked if there has been a perception, at least we thought, is that DR was really for larger enterprises and not for folks, it was reserved only for the largest organizations. And what we heard was that was not the case. And that was across the board, from our smaller organizations responding to our larger organizations responding. This sense that it's 80+% said it was a solution for all sizes of organization.
So yeah, I think the reality is it is still somewhat early days for good DR. If you think about what DR is, it's really about replicating all of your systems and networks in a second location, keeping it fresh, keeping it current, so that you can fail over to that. And setting up a network the first time is always kind of complicated. Setting up all your systems is complicated, much more difficult than running it day to day. And when you're thinking about DR, you're basically taking all that work and then doubling it. Plus, there's an additional degree of difficulty in keeping it all synchronized. So it's fairly easy sometimes to set up a DR environment. It becomes a challenge to keep that refreshed and up to date as you roll out new applications or the use of existing applications changes. I also think that enterprise IT started the DR trend. We can't have any downtime, and they would drop in an army of consultants and pro services and duplicate their networks that way. I think that with virtualization becoming more mainstream, hypervisor replication makes things quite a bit simpler. But there's still areas like network virtualization exists, but it's not really well understood how to use this in a DR context at the general, rubber hits the road, typical IT professional level. So it's still somewhat early days, and I think what we're going to see over time is it becomes simpler and easier, and eventually, duplicating a server or a network will be just as easy as it is to mirror a hard drive.
We wanted to understand what are the factors that IT professionals are using when evaluating DR solutions. What's most important to them? And far and away, the most important attribute or criteria was reliability, which is not surprising. You want to make sure if you are confronted by an outage that you are able to count on the solution you have in place. But I think what was interesting to us is that the speed of recovery and also cost in particular were both tied and also much further back than reliability. I think one thing we know from conversations we have with customers, particularly for folks sitting in the IT seat, having to make the case why a solution to justify the expense of a solution with their business and financial colleagues, because it's sometimes hard to quantify the impact of sort of weathering an outage event in a satisfactory way.
Yeah, when I think about reliability, I think of it, it's got to work, and it's got to work all the time. That doesn't mean just the failover process. It means keeping your data up to date. If I think back 10 years to a tape-based backup solution, the standard thing was to come in the morning and you'd have 57 red items and someone would have to track them down. And so backup and keeping the backups running became somebody's pretty much full-time job. In this case, you can't control when the disaster is going to occur. You got to keep that data and your network and your applications all fresh, and then it's got to work when you actually need it. So reliability is, it's got to work, and then it's got to work sufficiently fast that it's not, your big outage is minimized.
We wanted to understand what were the most common causes of IT downtime. And the top causes were interesting. I think we often think of disasters and gloom and doom, and that is what we associate with disaster recovery. But in fact, power outages, hardware error, and human error are the most common reasons for IT downtime. I think it's worth noting, though, that a third reported having been hit by a virus or malware attack in the past 5 years. And even though we think in terms of low probability natural disaster events, 1 in 5 of our respondents reported in the last 5 years that they were hit by an outage associated with a natural disaster.
So when I look at this data, it suggests to me, hey, everybody should get a UPS, uninterruptible power systems. Those are well understood. Maybe a generator, and that would eliminate 75% of the IT downtime. I don't believe that's the case. I think power outages stick out in people's minds. But what's interesting about this is if you were to go down this list and try to address each of them one by one, you get a much more reactionary and prevent a particular class of error versus solving them all at once. So I prefer to get your data offsite, get it into a different location, different data center, and that way you're protected against all these classes of problems simultaneously, rather than trying to solve, basically fight the last battle, fight the last war, and see what solve the problem that happened last time.
To follow on something I was saying earlier about sort of trying to quantify or project the cost of an outage, we first wanted to understand as IT leaders how they thought in terms of the impact of an outage to their organization. And I think that the top concerns may not be surprising to those of you on the call today. Loss of employee productivity was right up there at the very top, followed closely by delayed product delivery and loss of revenue. One interesting data point is I was just looking at the data, and we did, if you look at organizations with more than 500 employees and those with fewer than 500 employees, the top concern for the larger organization is loss of revenue. And for the organizations with fewer than 500 employees, the top concern is loss of employee productivity. So it does flip depending upon the size of the organization.
I also think one of the items that maybe was not listed here is internal reputation of the IT department. Certainly company reputation, people understand. If you go to a retailer and you can't do a transaction, that's not a good experience. But if you think of IT as a strategic organization within a company, if you can't keep the trains running on time, you can't keep the systems up and running, you'll be less likely to be tasked with more interesting business-focused projects.
But following on the quantifying the cost of downtime, we asked respondents to share with us what they thought it would cost them if they were experienced a downtime event. And close to 70% said that they would lose more than at least $20,000 per day if they were to experience an outage. And almost a third estimated losses of more than $100,000 per day. And certainly this speaks to the impact and how our organizations are so connected to technology and data and systems. The other thing that I thought was interesting is that more than half had experienced a data outage of more than 8 hours. So these are not sort of little blips for money.
I also think it's interesting to break this down application by application. So you probably experienced a scenario where email is down, but your file share is still up, or vice versa, or maybe you can't print. So there's different applications. It's not always, the whole building burned down or the whole site is unavailable. There's a gradient between, one application's down for a few people to one application's down for everyone, all the way to all the applications are down for everyone. And it's good to think that through and decide where to focus your disaster recovery efforts from a financial basis.
We wanted to understand sort of what preparation organizations have in place today to prepare for a disaster event or an outage event. And while the slide sort of paints sort of a negative cast that 2 in 5 do not have a formal documented disaster recovery plan, the reality of it is 60% told us they did. But I think what's interesting is the frequency at which they're testing those plans. 40% once a year, 25% once a quarter, but close to 30%, it might be hard to read from the slide, are rarely or never test a plan that they have in place.
So I think the real key for a plan is first of all, have it written down in sort of a checklist format. During a disaster, there's going to be a lot of stress. It may be at 2 a.m. and you may not necessarily get your A team to be able to work on it. They may be dealing with other, if there's an earthquake or regional disaster, they may be dealing with other things. So you have to make sure that it can be executed by the people that you have available at that time. The other thing is that that's not the time when you want to figure out what you have to do. It needs to be, step A, B, C, D. As far as the testing frequency, I tend to believe that quarterly is pretty much the gold standard. More than that gets expensive and costly. Once a year, however, can be adequate depending on your industry. If you've got a manufacturing floor where it's just a bunch of machines running, or a bunch of computers running machinery, and they tend not to be updated, and they only run one application. Testing that once a year is probably adequate. What you really need to do is match up your testing frequency with your change frequency. Now, if you're a software development shop and you're adding new applications and systems all the time, then you probably need to be more along that once a quarter spectrum.
So we want to understand, for those that experienced an outage, a downtime event, what did they do? What did they learn from that experience? What we heard is that more than half who experienced a downtime event made changes to that DR plan. They learned from what happened and they wanted to make adjustments. It's even greater for those experiencing outages greater than 8 hours, 65% said that. And then in terms of the changes they made, 39% increased their DR investments. And to follow on what Jeff said, about 25% increased their DR testing frequency.
Yeah, I think that what you're seeing here is an admission that people realized their DR plans weren't good enough after the disaster. And one of the challenges I've seen is for IT to sell to the business really an adequate DR implementation. And this can be a difficult thing. And so I would say try to find a way to partner with a finance person or executive management that can help them understand what it's really going to mean if your services go down for an extended period of time. And it really is, it's an insurance policy. And there's some insurance policies like your house insurance policy, like you hope to never use. And then there's insurance policies like automobile insurance where, it's frequent for people to get into an auto accident. And I would argue that disaster recovery is more of that auto insurance policy type category.
Thanks, Jeff. And so now we want to open up to questions, and we have a few that have come in, and I'm going to give the first to Jeff. Just read it out loud for everyone. In a DR solution, what is the ETA for the fix of VMware CBT, the Delta change, backup to cloud backup speed improves?
So these are really Zetta product specific questions. So it sounds like there's somebody who's using the product. So I would suggest we get back to them directly. But that said, We do support CBT from VMware. If you want to change the frequency of the backups, all you have to do is drop an email to support@zetta.net, and we can facilitate that. And as far as the restore directly into VMware environment speed, it's an issue that our engineering is working on.
Okay. Another question, what are the key characteristics to consider when looking for a DR technical implementation?
When I think of the key characteristics for a DR plan, one is have your contact list. It's one thing to say you've got an online address book and wiki or something like that, but if it's not available, you can't get to it in the disaster. So have that phone tree so you can get the message out and have it on paper. Secondarily, have your critical systems, your critical vendors also listed out on paper, and information about how to actually run your disaster recovery plan. Usually the first step is a notification step. Look, the disaster has occurred, it's been declared. The other pieces are going to be specific, but what you really want to do is get it to the point where you can basically poke a button to invoke your disaster recovery plan as much as possible.
Okay. Next one, what's the one thing you've seen IT professionals miss when it comes to disaster recovery planning?
I think that disaster recovery, like business continuity, is actually a bigger scope problem than just IT. There's HR considerations, there's finance considerations, and one example that I've used quite a few times is I knew a company that they got what they considered the IT portion of the disaster recovery done pretty well. All the systems failed over properly, but one of the core business activities was actually printing checks. And it takes a special printer to print checks. It has a magnetic toner on the bottom so that the banks can read them. And that wasn't baked into part of their DR plan. And so they succeeded from a technical point of view, but failed the business. And so really think through and partner with the business all the things that need to work in a disaster. Probably not every single application has to work in a disaster, and some things can work in a degraded mode. But really think through, what are all the things we need to support if the main site was down for a day, a week, a month, or it's never coming back? What are all the things you need to do in each of those different scenarios? Another question was, does Zetta DR plan have a solution or protection plan for ransomware recovery? Yeah, so our solution for this, we're replication based, but we also have snapshots. And so the solution there would be to roll back to a point in time with the snapshots before the ransomware had encrypted your data. This requires having a retention period that is sufficiently long, longer than your detection of the ransomware, but it's a good way of making sure you can always recover to a point in time in the past.
Great. Well, I think are there any last questions? Because I've gone through the submitted list, and if not, then we'll look to wrap things up. I want to thank everyone for joining us on the call today. And wanted to let you know that we have information from the for the survey results on our website. You can go just to our website, to zetta.net, click on the resources link at the top of the page, and you can get to a summary of the report and the stats. If you'd like a full readout of our findings, and that's a multi-page report, feel free to contact us at sales@zetta.com. Thank you very much.